A very good evening to all. Can you able to hear me? Okay. Very good evening to all. First of all, a very warm touch lake to all the participants who are currently present in our webinar and joining us from YouTube Live. May I first request everyone to kindly put your videos on and microphone on mute during the whole session. Thank you. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Tenzin, Assistant Program Coordinator of Tibet House, New Delhi. And I welcome you all to our fourth session of today's virtual program on Introduction to Buddhism, which consists of 24 different topics taught by different speakers with profound knowledge on Nalanda Buddhist Studies. And once again, we are very glad and honored to have among us Dr. Pooja Dabralla, who will be speaking on Sevenfold divisions this time. In our previous session, Pujala spoke about the summary of Buddhist psychology, in which she covered topics like why study mind, mind and its definition, classification of minds, and conceptual and non-conceptual mind. So if you have not watched the previous part, please do visit Tibet House YouTube channel, in which you will find all the related videos. So before we proceed with today's session, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Pooja Dabralla. She is an assistant professor, Department of Buddhist and Tibetan Studies at Namgyal Institute of Tibetology, Sikkim. Her doctoral research topic is on Nagarjuna's philosophy of emptiness and Jetsongkhapa's exposition, descent into prolific periods. She has teaching and research experience with a wide range of institutions, including the University of Delhi, Jawaharlal Nehru University, Tibet House, and YMCA. She has numerous publications and also presented papers on the themes such as the practice of emptiness, a Buddhist approach to inner and world peace, Buddhist psychology, form and substance in Buddhist philosophy, and so forth at national and international conferences and seminars. Pujala is also very proficient in Tibetan as well as in German languages. So I now request Dr. Pujala to kindly proceed the session.
Thank you, Tenzin Lengmola, and Tashidale, everyone. Hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so Tenzin Lengmola, thank you for the introduction and also for summarizing what I did last time. So yes, what he said was there. And let me again start by thanking Venerable Geshe-la and Tibet House for this opportunity. So as we know, out of the 24 lectures, today is the fourth one, right? We have already, there were three lectures on different themes. First on Four Noble Truths, and then on Buddha nature. And then the last one was on the mind, means the nature of mind and the purpose of studying mind. And this session is going to be on the classification of mind, one of a very comprehensive way of classifying the minds that we have, known as Sevenfold division of mind. So before we go there, let me just, okay, how many of you, just if I may ask, how many of you were present last session? I think I can see most of you were present, right? And if there were some who were not present, it would be good to listen to the last class, because the last class, so what we did was the definition of the mind and the nature of the mind. So only when we know the definition of mind in a very technical sense, then all these classifications will make sense to us. So if you can go back to the recordings and listen to it. But and then from the previous classes, just a quick recap, because it's a gap of 2 weeks. So if you remember how we started was with the purpose of this Buddhist psychology course, that okay, for this we went into the idea of how all the experiences, be it desirable experiences or undesirable experiences, we call it pleasant experiences or unpleasant experiences. Pleasant experiences, which we all like to have, and the unpleasant experiences, which we all want to shun, which we do not want to have. They all come into being by the interaction of two things that we learned last time, right? The interaction of your mind or your subject with the objects. So this interaction determines whether we are going to have a very pleasant experience or unpleasant experience, or third one as a very neutral experience. So now, finally, if this interaction is the one which determines whether or not we are going to have what we like. So if this is how it determines our happiness and also not having suffering, then this interaction becomes very important for us. And not only this interaction between what? Between two things, subject and object. So we have to know the subject so well, and we have to know the object so well. So this we learned a little bit with the examples last class. That, okay, if we want this interaction to be a very healthy interaction, so that only the happiness comes into being and not the miseries, so then we have to make sure that what this interaction happens with the two most refined things. What? The most refined subject interacting with the most refined object. And how the most refined subject? For this, we have to know the subtlest of the subject. And for the most refined object, we have to know the subtlest of the object. So for studying the subject, the whole stream of Buddhist psychology, Western psychology, neuroscience, all they are meant to study this subject. And then to study this objective reality or the reality of the object in the most succinct way, and also how to make this subject, how to know the subtlest of the reality of this object, sorry. So that is, for that purpose, we have the study of philosophy or ontology, right? So now what we are covering in these two sections, last section and this section, is the study of the subject. Okay, how to make, first of all, how to identify this subject. Okay, what is this subject like? Number one. Number two, after you have known something about this subject, what are the different kinds of the subjects or the minds that we have, that we experience? And then once you have this, gain a little bit of expertise in identifying the different kinds of mind in your continuum, then manipulating these minds to give rise to all the pleasant experiences. So this will happen only in stages. So for that, first we have to study what is this mind like, what is the nature of mind. And this we learned last class, that okay, nature of this mind. So first we learned that how this mind is an impermanent entity. Give me a second. Okay, so we learned that how this mind that we have, first of all, it's an empirical reality. Okay, this is something we all experience. And then there were side discussions that, okay, how can I know that the mind that I have is different from the brain, physical brain, or it's just the emergent property of the brain? So for this, of course, I told you last time also that, there is this text known as Pramana Vartika, where Acharya Dharmakirti went into a great detail of how there is a mind which is different from the brain. And this mind, has the capacity to take you to the most sublime state, which is known as Buddhahood. Okay, so now the mind, which is of empirical reality within us, so this mind is impermanent in nature. Number one, we learned that. And this mind is non-physical in nature. So unlike this brain that we have, which is physical in nature, this mind is non-physical in nature and yet impermanent in nature. So this is what we learned about the nature of the mind. And then we went into the definition of the mind. How can I know this mind technically? How we define this mind? So the definition that we learned was, if you remember, it was the agent, means the mind is an agent that is clear and knowing, right? So it's an agent, means it's a subject. Agent which has which performs the action of cognizing its object, action of knowing its object, action of apprehending its object. So this is an agent, number one. And this agent has two aspects. What are the aspects? That this agent should have the aspect of clarity, number one. And this agent known as mind should have the aspect of knowing its object. So these aspects should be there when we talk about something as a mind. If one of the aspect is missing, then it is not mind. Okay, so this we have to gain conviction that the mind that I have, or any entity, what we call as mind, should have two aspects. Number one, it should have the aspect of clarity. Clarity means the surface of this mind should be clear, so that any reflection of the object or any image of the object can be formed on it. Number one. Number two, it should know its object. It should know its object, so it should have the aspect of knowing the objects. So clarity and knowing the object. So an agent which has these two aspects is known as mind. Okay, so this is how we define the mind. And then I mentioned that, okay, next class we are going to go into the classifications of this. So this mind, which is clear and knowing In nature, this mind, what are the different types of this mind? What are the different classification of this mind? So for this, I mentioned few of the classifications under which we study the different types of the mind. And for that, let me again share the PPT, the PowerPoint presentation. Lemula, I'm not able to share the content. If you can.
Okay, I'll share it.
If you can allow me to share the content. I'll be using a different PPT this time. I edited it. So if I can share it.
Sure. I'll make you up this one, the
Yeah.
presenter.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you see that on the screen? Can anybody confirm if you can see Buddhist psychology slide on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so now we'll be moving to the other one. So if you have this PPT with you, so this is what we learned last time, the mind and its definition. And today what we are going to do, so as I mentioned, there are different ways of classifying the different types of minds we have within uncontinuum. And one of the very beautiful way of classifying the mind is known as sevenfold division of mind, right? So this we are going to do today. And then the second number, which you see, is the non-conceptual mind and the conceptual mind. This we did last time. So this is again, we have to kind of recollect it so that, we understand the sevenfold division of mind. And then the sense consciousness and mental consciousness, this I'll try to cover today as a part of sevenfold division of mind. And then cognitive mind and affective mind, of course, as a part of Nalanda diploma course, Nalanda master's course. Again, we study this division of mind. And the fifth one, non-mistaken mind and mistaken mind. Let's see if time allows, we can go into that also. This is something very, very important. And the sixth one, seventh one, and eighth one, I'll not be touching today. But, during these courses that we, like proper certificate diploma courses, we study these divisions in much more detail and also with the help of various examples. So if somebody is interested, in fact, somebody is studying Buddhist, Western psychology and also clinical psychology, I will highly recommend to go into the details of these divisions and the examples given there. Not only the details, the definitions are given, the further divisions are also given, and the various examples are given to understand these minds. So it'll be very good if we can study these in detail. Okay, so now the sevenfold division of mind. Sevenfold division of mind. Let us all read them first. Before I explain them, let us just read them. So I can see the number is given twice. So I think there is some error. Okay, so let's read them in order. So first one is direct valid perceiver. And if you want the Sanskrit terminology, and the Tibetan is also given there. Direct valid perceiver. Number 2 is inferential cognizer. Number 3 is known as subsequent cognizer. Number 4 is known as correctly assuming consciousness. Number 5 is non-discerning direct perception. Number 6 is doubting consciousness. Number 7, deceptive or wrong consciousness. And then before I go into the meaning of them, let me just mention this, that this is not the exhaustive division of mind. So unlike the last time, we studied the conceptual and non-conceptual mind. So that is an exhaustive division of mind. What do you mean by exhaustive division of mind? That any mind you can think of, any mind that we experience in our continuum, that should either be conceptual or non-conceptual in nature. So this we learned last time. Unlike that, this sevenfold division of mind is not the exhaustive division of mind. Means there are some minds which do not fall under this classification. So don't worry about that. But the thing is, we should know that this is not the exhaustive division of mind, but it's a very beautiful way of dividing all the cognitive minds. Okay, so now, as you can see now, as we have read it, so before I give the meaning of them, just reading them, just reading their labels, we can see that you see the bottom, at the bottom. Okay, anybody who can read the last one, the seventh one for me? What is the seventh one, which you can read on the screen? Anybody?
Wrong consciousness.
Right, deceptive or wrong consciousness. Either say deceptive consciousness or wrong consciousness, whichever is fine. So now you can see the deceptive and wrong consciousness at the bottom is the most erroneous mind, right? Even if I don't give the meaning to you, but you can, from just the label, one can understand, okay, deceptive and wrong consciousness means the erroneous consciousness, the most incorrect consciousness that we have. Okay, and then as we go up, as we go up, the minds are becoming more and more refined. The minds are becoming more and more refined. They are improving. They are improving. Okay, so the bottom one, deceptive or wrong consciousness, deceptive consciousness, let's say, this is the most erroneous form of mind that we can have. And then from there, as we go up, we can see that the mind is becoming more and more refined. Okay, so for example, let's say deceptive consciousness, let me just give you a quick example. For example, the mobile that I have in my hand, how many of you can see that? The mobile that I have in my hand. So let's say if I start to, saying that, okay, this is a chocolate, right? This mobile is a chocolate. So it's a deceptive mind, right? So this is a deceptive mind. This is the most erroneous form of mind that I can have. So this is the seventh one. And then from there, doubting consciousness. So then let's say somebody comes and then says, oh, I'm not sure whether this mobile is a chocolate or this is a flower. Okay, so the doubt. The person is doubtful about whether it's a chocolate or it's a mobile. So the person has gone from deceptive to the doubting consciousness. And which one is better? What would you say? Okay, somebody saying that, okay, this mobile, directly saying that this mobile is chocolate, number one scenario. And number two, other person is saying that this mobile, I'm not very sure. This mobile is, I think it's mobile or it's a chocolate. So doubting consciousness. So what do you think? Which one is a better consciousness, or it's yes, which one is the better mind or consciousness? Anybody? What do you think from the two, deceptive and doubting?
Doubting consciousness.
Doubting consciousness is far more better than a sheer deceptive consciousness, a mind which apprehends its object totally distortedly. Okay, so when you go from 7 to 6, you see that the mind has become more refined. It has become more refined in the sense of it has become a little better than the earlier one. Then you see the non-discerning direct perception. So don't worry, what is exactly non-discerning direct perception? This I'm going to explain. But just from the labels, see how these sevenfold divisions have been, put in an order. So now the non-discerning direct perception. So although it's a non-discerning, but still it's a direct perception. It's a direct way of looking at the object, right? So it's much better than the doubting consciousness. Then the next one is correctly assuming consciousness. So you can see the word correct. Correct is coming there, right? Two words are there, correct and assumptions, right? So although it's a mind which assumes, it's on the level of the assumption, but the assumption is the correct assumption. So from the deceptive, it is changing into correct assumption, right? It's changing into something correct. So it is even more refined. Okay, then after that, you can see cognizers, right? Subsequent cognizer, inferential cognizer, and direct valid perceiver. So the valid word is there and the cognizing word is there. So we see that from the assumption, now the mind is improving to become a cognizer. Cognizer meaning a mind which knows its object correctly. A mind which cognizes or knows its object correctly. Okay, so from the assumption now, correct assumption, the mind is becoming a cognizer. And within cognizer, there are different types. Subsequent cognizers are there, inferential cognizers are there, and direct valid cognizers are there. Okay, so we see, so from this, the message to be taken is that, okay, at the bottom, what is given here is the most erroneous form of mind. And then from there, if we, keep improving them, they become cognizers, or they become correct. They become correct mind. They become valid minds. So they keep improving. They keep improving. So now, for example, the mind that we have, at times, the mind that we have are very erroneous in nature, right? Very deceptive in nature. For example, we just learned from the first two sessions that how at the core of all our miseries is the distorted minds. At the core of all our miseries is the ignorance. And that ignorance, in a very technical form, we call it self-grasping ignorance. And what is that ignorance like, and how can I undo that? That will all be explained in the coming sessions. But what we learned is, at the core of all our miseries, which we dislike, is the ignorance. Ignorance is the one, and this ignorance is the and in a very precise form of ignorance known as self-grasping ignorance. So we have self-grasping ignorance. The mind that we have is the self-grasping ignorance, and also the mind that we have is very narrow in approach, right? The mind that we have are very narrow in approach. Although, so while our mind has the capacity, while our mind has the potential to have the most refined form of wisdom, and also the most refined way of knowing the objects, and not only knowing the objects, knowing all objects. This is the potential of our mind. Our mind has the potential to have the most refined form of wisdom, and also to know all phenomena, not remaining so narrow, but to know all phenomena. This is the potential that we have. This is the potential of our mind. Okay. In other words, our mind has the potential to become fearless, and also has the potential to become omniscient, right? So while we have these potentials, the mind that we have right now is totally opposite in nature. What is that? It is full of self-grasping ignorance, and it is very narrow in engaging with the objects. It knows just, few objects. It doesn't know all phenomena. So now this mind that we have, if there is a way, or if we follow the right steps, then we can improve them to the way it is improving here, from deceptive to doubting, then non-discerning, correctly assuming, subsequent cognizer, inferential cognizer, and direct valid perceiver. So we can improve, if we take right steps, we can improve this mind, the most erroneous mind that we have, which give rise to all forms of anxiety, suffering, and all negative emotions, and also a very narrow way of thinking. That all can be changed into something which helps us to fulfill our true aspiration. What is that? Known as state of fearlessness and state of omniscience. State of fearlessness, in technical term, we call it nirvana, right? And state of lasting happiness. Lasting happiness, technical term, we call it omniscience. So this we learned. Now let's go into the details of this. Okay, so the first one is direct valid perceiver. So as you can see, I have given the definition and also the divisions, but I'll not be explaining the definitions, because the definition, if for definitions, you really need to go into the meaning and a very precise understanding of each and every word. So where it is possible, I'll try to explain the definition also, but for the next perceivers or next minds, coming mind, other divisions, I may not be able to go to the definition because of paucity of the time. Okay, so the first one is, as you can see, direct valid perceiver. Okay, in Sanskrit, pratyaksh. Direct valid perceiver and pratyaksh. Okay, let me show this to you first. Direct valid perceiver, and the second one is known as inferential cognizer. Inferential cognizer. So the direct valid perceiver, and then second one is inferential cognizer. Let me explain this in one set. So direct valid perceiver. Okay, now we have to interact a little bit, and then when I ask question, somebody just unmute and try to interact. Okay, so let's say how many of you can see the screen of the device that you are using, be it your laptop, your tablet, or your mobile? How many of you can see that? Okay, so how do you see that? Do you see that directly, or you have to okay, just how do you see that? Do you see it directly, or you have to use a reason that, okay, maybe I'm using a mobile, or maybe, or I need a reason to say that, okay, I'm seeing a tablet, or the screen of my tablet, screen of my laptop, screen of my computer. Okay, tell me, anybody, do you see it directly, or do you have to rely on a reason? Your screen, your own screen. Anybody just unmute yourself?
On the screen of my laptop.
Yes. How do you see that? Do you see that directly, or you have to give yourself a reason?
I can see directly.
Right. Okay. So you see it directly. Okay. So direct valid perceiver, where your mind sees an object directly. Okay. Now the inferential cognizer. Inferential cognizer, for example, let's say, okay, for example, inferential cognizer. Okay, for example, let's say from your window outside, you see smoke coming out of a house. Okay, you see smoke coming out of a house. So just seeing the smoke coming out of a house, how many of you can infer that there is a fire? Anybody? Can you infer that, okay, there must be fire inside when the smoke is coming out of the house? Yes. Okay, so how many of you say that, okay, I can infer that there is fire in that house, just seeing the smoke? Okay, good. And how many of you say that you are seeing the fire yourself? Okay, or how many of you say that I'm not seeing the fire, but I can infer from the smoke that there is fire inside? Okay, good. So now, although you don't see the fire, but by depending on the smoke, by seeing the smoke, you can infer the presence of the fire inside the house, right? So this is, although you're not seeing the fire directly, but still you can know the presence of fire through inference, right? Through inferring. So this is known as inferential cognizing or inferential cognizer, where you have to rely on a reason. You have to rely on something to see the presence of something else. For example, seeing the smoke coming out of a house, you can infer the presence of a fire inside the house, right? So now from this, we have to know that there is a two ways of knowing your object. Okay. Anyway, okay, you say, okay, how can I know my object? There are two ways. There are two ways of knowing any object. Either you can know the object directly, or you can know the object through inference. And then if you can think of any other ways of knowing your object, they should fall under these two categories. Okay, so how your mind knows an object, there are two ways only. One, it knows the object directly, or it knows the object through inference. So when it knows the object directly, this falls under the category of direct perceivers. Whereas when it knows the object through inference by depending on something else, like a sign or like a reason, then it is known as inferential cognizer. Okay, so direct valid perceiver and inferential cognizer. Okay, let me ask you a few things. Let me give you a few examples just to confirm whether you have understood the distinction or not. Okay, let's say, okay, let's say, for example, now the screen, this is the issue. Okay, how many of you see the wall of your room? How many of you can see the wall of your room? Right, and what is that mind? Direct perceiver or inferential? Anybody? Now, from what we learned, anybody just unmute yourself. The mind which knows or
Perceiver?
sees the wall. Yes.
Direct valid perceiver.
Direct valid perceiver or direct perceiver, let's say. Okay, direct perceiver. Okay, and how many of you agree with this? Okay, good. Okay, good. Now let me give you another example. Let's say you have not cooked any food, okay, yet, but you can smell the food. You can smell the food coming out of your house, right? And from the smell of the food, you infer, or let's say from the smell, you can infer, okay, although I have not cooked the food, but there is somebody in my neighborhood is cooking food, right? So although you have not seen the food yourself, but just the smell, from the smell, you can infer that somebody is cooking food in my neighborhood. So what is that mind like, which knows the presence of the food in the neighborhood? What is that? Direct or inferential?
Inferential.
Okay, inferential. How inferential? How do you say that it's inferential and not direct?
Because I cannot see the food, but I have the smell as a sign of the food.
Very good. And how many of you agree with David La? That, okay, yes, although I have not seen the food, but I'm very sure that somebody is cooking food, that there is a presence of food in my neighborhood. How? Through the smell, which is not the food, but by depending on that sign, the smell of the food, I can infer the presence of the food in my neighborhood. So that's, although it's not a direct perceiver, but it knows the object. What is that? Food. How? Through inference. Through inference. So this is known as inferential cognizer. Okay, so these examples will help us to know the distinction. Okay, tell me now, the second question is, Just tell me, anybody, which one do you think is more powerful? Okay, before I ask this question, let me ask you, which one is more reliable? Which one is correct?
Valid
Direct
perceiver.
valid perceiver or the inferential cognizer? What do you think?
Direct valid perceiver.
And what about the inferential cognizer? This is not correct. For
It
example,
may be, it may not be.
and what about the direct perceivers? They may not be correct also. For example, let's say, how many of you have mistaken a coil of rope for snake? Can we? Yes, just your eye consciousness under tremendous fear, and you have, fear of snakes. Then, and when the light is dim, then just the coil of rope is there, and then your eye consciousness can mistaken it to be a snake. So, in other words, thank you for the reply. The thing is, the valid and the invalid can be with both. Direct valid. So I'm not going to the valid right now, just a direct perceiver. Of course, what you said is correct. When we say direct valid perceiver, we are just talking about the valid ones. Likewise, the inferential cognizers, we are talking about the valid inferences. But it doesn't mean that there cannot be wrong inferences. Okay, there are wrong inferences as well. So this will fall under other categories. Other categories like deceptive, the 7th one. But there are wrong inferences also, and there are correct inferences also. But the second one is mainly talking about all the valid inferences. And the first one the direct perceptions can also be erroneous. The direct perception can also be erroneous, but this one, the first one, which says direct valid perceiver, it includes all the valid ones. Okay, clear? It includes all the valid one. Then what about the erroneous one? They are also there in the 7th one. In the 7th one, we will learn that there are direct deceptive consciousnesses and there are conceptual ones also. Okay, so before I go there, so the reliable, both can be reliable, right? For example, when you see the smoke and then you infer the presence of the fire, and then you go yourself and check, oh yes, it is fire there, right? I was correct. It was a correct inference, right? So both can be reliable, right? Both can be reliable. But while both can be reliable, now the second question is, which one is more powerful? Which one is more powerful? One is, one person knows the presence of the fire through the smoke. Seeing the smoke, one knows the presence of the fire, number one. And the other person goes to the house and sees the fire through direct perception. Which one do you think is more powerful? Anybody? More powerful. Both are reliable, right? The fire is there. Your inference is correct inference, but which one is more reliable or more powerful when it comes to, okay, knowing the object? Directly knowing the object or knowing the object through inference? What do you think?
What do you mean by powerful?
Powerful in the sense which gives you more conviction.
Naturally, the first one, the direct valid perceiver.
Very good. So direct valid perceiver. Okay. While both are correct, somebody who is just seeing the smoke and says, oh, there must be a fire there. Person is correct. And the other person actually goes there and sees the presence of fire. So both are correct. While both are correct, but which one is more powerful is direct one, right? So direct and inferential. Okay, direct and inferential. So these are the two ways of knowing an object. And while you know this object, which one is more powerful? The direct valid perceiver. Okay, good. Now, direct valid perceiver are of different kinds. Within the direct valid perceivers, there are different kinds are there. So this we'll do a little later. Let me move on to the third one now. What is the third one? Subsequent cognizer. Okay, subsequent cognizer. So the subsequent cognizer. So as the term subsequent means not the first one, right? Not the first one. So for this, what we have to know is something known as valid cognition, or let's say valid cognition, valid cognizer or prime cognizer. In Tibetan call it sema. So subsequent cognizer, what is the opposite of it? If we know the opposite of it, it will be very easy for us to understand the subsequent cognizer. And then if you're seeing on the screen, okay, the previous slide, okay, it's not mentioned here, but there is one classification known as valid cognizer and subsequent cognizer. So subsequent cognizer, the third one. To understand this, we have to know something known as valid cognizer or valid cognition. Valid cognition. So what do you mean by subsequent cognizer? Let's say, let me give you one example. Just imagine that we are, meeting in person. Okay, we are in a classroom, and then the discussion is happening in classroom in person. Okay, just imagine that. And then I'm showing this mobile to you. Okay, I'm showing this mobile to you. So when I show this mobile to you, and then ask you to look at this mobile for 5 moments. Can you do that? Just look at this mobile for 5 moments. Okay, not distracting yourself. Just look at this mobile for 5 moments. Okay, or 5 seconds, let's say. Okay, so when you do that, there are 5 moments, right? So the first moment, let's say, okay, now how you see your mobile is, let's say, now use little technical terms. So you say, I can use my eyes, right? I see it through my eyes. So in technical sum, you can say, I know, I see it through eye consciousness. Okay, my eye consciousness seeing this mobile, right? So now I ask you to see this mobile or look at this mobile for 5 moments or 5 seconds. So now when you're looking at this mobile for 5 seconds or 5 moments, or your eye consciousness is looking at this mobile for 5 moments, the first moment in the sense, your eye consciousness, which sees the first moment is known as valid cognition. The first one is known as valid cognition, whereas the second moment and down, they are all known as subsequent cognizer. The subsequent cognizer. Okay, the first moment is given the label. The mind, which knows the first moment mind is given the label as valid cognition or prime cognition. Some people translate it as prime cognizer, some people translate it as valid cognizer. The first moment is given the label. The first moment mind is given the label of valid cognizer, and the later moments, second moment and down, they are all known as subsequent cognizer. Subsequent cognizer. Okay, clear? Okay, now now let's do this exercise. So when you look at this mobile for 5 seconds, so you have eye consciousness of 5 seconds, right? First, second eye consciousness, second moment eye consciousness, third moment eye consciousness, fourth moment eye consciousness, and fifth moment eye consciousness. Now let me ask you one question. The first moment eye consciousness sees the mobile, right? And it sees it correctly, right? And the second moment mind is also sees the mobile and sees it correctly, validly, right? And the third moment mind also sees the mobile and sees it validly. Now, but the label valid cognition is given only to the first moment, right? I said that the first moment eye consciousness is given the label valid cognition, whereas the second moment and down, they are given the label subsequent cognizer. They are known as subsequent cognizer and not the valid cognizer. So how many of you feel that, okay, there must be a question that, okay, while the second moment, third moment, fourth moment, they are all valid, right? They're all valid, and they are also cognizer, right? Cognizer meaning which knows its object correctly. A mind which knows its object correctly. So while they all know the mobile correctly, they are not seeing the mobile as chocolate. They are also seeing the mobile as mobile. And at the same time, they are valid in nature because they see the mobile as mobile and they know the mobile as mobile. So why they are not given the label valid cognition? Okay, so this question can come to you. So don't worry about that. The point is, this is about the labeling. Okay, so the first moment, it's not that the second moment, third moment, fourth moment, they are erroneous. They are also equally valid. But only the first moment, first mind is given the label valid cognition. Okay, in Tibetan we call it tsema. Tsema. So this is the translation, that is used. And we have to use some translation. So the translation which is commonly used for this tsema word is valid cognition or prime cognition. So, and what is the meaning of that? The first moment of that mind, which knows the object freshly, okay? And then the later moments which follow that first cognition, they are all given the label subsequent cognizer. While they are also valid, they are also cognizer, but they are not given the label valid cognizer. They are not the tsema. Okay, they are given the label subsequent cognizer. So this we have to learn that, okay, in psychology, within the sevenfold division of mind, something known as subsequent cognizer as opposed to valid cognizer. Subsequent cognizer as opposed to valid cognizer. In simple terms, when you look at something for 5 moments, the first moment, only the first moment is known as valid cognizer or the prime cognizer. And the second moment and down, they are all known as subsequent cognizer. Subsequent cognizer. And of course, there is a question that why only first moment is given the label valid cognizer, and the following moments, they are given the label subsequent cognizer. Okay, so for this, it will be helpful to know that, okay, for example, you know, we are doing the introduction, right? Introduction to Buddhism. And then the way we learned that, okay, finally Buddha discovered that, okay, all the sufferings that we dislike and all the happiness that we always want to experience, they all come into being by dependence on their causes, right? They're not randomly coming into being. The suffering that we experience and we dislike, they also come into being by dependence on their causes. And the happiness that we want, that also comes into being by dependence on their causes. And then what is the cause of all the suffering? Finally, we just learned that, okay, it is self-grasping ignorance. What is that? We are going to learn in the coming sessions. But, okay, we learned that, okay, at the core of all our suffering, Buddha discovered there is ignorance. And then how can I undo this ignorance? For this, I have to introduce the light of wisdom. So wisdom has to be introduced. So now he discovered the path, right? He discovered this path. What is the path? That, okay, I have to have the wisdom. I have to have the unconditional love. Okay, so this will come later. Let's say I have to have the wisdom. I have to cultivate the wisdom in order to eliminate the ignorance. When ignorance is eliminated, all my sufferings, all my negative emotions, which are grounded on this ignorance, will be eliminated. So now Buddha discovered this fact, right? He discovered, and this wisdom, precisely known as wisdom of emptiness, that he discovered, right? Wisdom of emptiness or wisdom of dependent origination. So this is, you know, some sessions are solely dedicated to this topic, wisdom of emptiness. So this is going to be covered later. So now, but he discovered that, okay, ultimate reality or emptiness, right? He discovered this. And he discovered the fact that, okay, by wisdom of emptiness is the panacea for all our problem. If we want to get rid of all our sufferings, then we have to cultivate this wisdom. So this Prince Siddhartha, who became Buddha Shakyamuni later on, he discovered this fact. And then now, after that, he taught it, right? Then he taught it to the masses. And then even now, we are studying what he has taught, and we try our best to meditate. So now my difficult to discover something or to follow something. Anybody? What do you think? The way Buddha Shakyamuni discovered first, okay, what is at the core of all my suffering? What is at the core of all the suffering of the people around me? It's the self-grasping ignorance. And then what is the counterforce? Is wisdom of emptiness. So this is the panacea. So he discovered this. He's discovered this fact. And then he taught it. And then what he taught, on that basis, we are studying now. And we are trying to understand what he discovered, right? So now tell me, which do you think is more difficult? Discovering something or to follow something later? Anybody? What do you think?
Discover.
To discover something is very difficult, right? To discover something, you do not have anything as a basis, right? You do not have something to follow. You have to discover it completely new. Now, but to follow something is very easy, right? To follow what others have already discovered. For example, most of the scientific discoveries that had happened, now to know them is very easy, but to discover them it's very difficult, right? Somebody who discovered the scientific realities, many of the realities of our, you know, world, they have that discovery has been very, very difficult, but to follow later on, to study now in universities and colleges is very easy, right? So the valid cognition is like the somebody who discovers, who knows the object freshly, right? Whereas the later moments are like the followers, where you imitate what the valid cognition has seen already, right? So for example, when you look at this mobile for 5 seconds or 5 moments, the first one is like somebody who discovers something, who sees something freshly. And the later moments are like somebody who follows what has already been discovered, who imitates what has already been discovered. So therefore the label given is subsequent cognizer. And the first one, the label is given as valid cognizer. Clear? So the first one is like somebody who discovers something freshly. And then this I consciousness, the first moment knows the object freshly. And the later moments, they are more like the imitation of the first moment. The first moment already saw the mobile, right? And then the later moments, they imitate. So therefore, the label given is subsequent cognizer. Whereas the first one, the label given is prime cognizer or valid cognizer. So this is known as the category subsequent cognizer. Now, within subsequent cognizer, there can be two kinds: direct valid subsequent cognizers and inferential. In other words, the first and second can have both the types. It can be prime cognizer, they can be subsequent cognizer also. Okay, they can be prime cognizer, they can be subsequent cognizer. Let me give you one example, and then you try to tell me which one do you think is the prime cognizer and which one do you think is the subsequent cognizer. And then, is it direct prime cognizer or it is a direct subsequent cognizer? This also you have to work on. Okay, let me give you one example. For example, the example that we were working on, this mobile, you see this mobile directly, okay, without any reason, without relying on anything else. You see it directly for 5 moments, right? And then the first moment of this I consciousness, which sees this mobile, tell me, is this first of all, tell me, is this a direct perceiver or it is an inferential cognizer? I consciousness, the first moment of I consciousness, which sees this mobile. Anybody, just unmute yourself and tell me, is it a direct perceiver or it is an inferential cognizer? From what we have learned.
I think it's a direct perceiver.
Yes, it's a direct perceiver. Anybody who can help us how it is a direct and not the inferential one? How? Okay, I consciousness which sees the mobile right in front of you. Why it's a direct and not inferential? Anybody?
I see through my sense consciousness. It is I consciousness.
Okay, thank you. So it's very technically correct. Okay, so yes, I see it through my sense consciousness, and sense consciousnesses are always direct, right? Sense consciousnesses are always direct in their nature. They are never inferential. Okay, and then what we learn? For inference, you need to rely on something else, right? You have to rely on some reason or something else to infer the presence of mobile. Whereas for seeing the mobile, I'm not relying on anything else. I'm seeing it directly, right? So this I consciousness is direct perceiver. And what you just said, that sense consciousnesses are always direct perceiver. This will come later, but this is a direct perceiver. Now while it is a direct perceiver, now second question is it a direct valid perceiver or is it a direct subsequent cognizer? It's a direct prime cognizer or direct subsequent cognizer? First moment of your I consciousness seeing the mobile. Anybody?
Direct prime cognizer.
Direct prime cognizer. So while it's a direct consciousness, it's also a prime cognizer. Why? Because it's the first moment. It knows its object freshly. Okay, first. Okay, now the second moment and down, I consciousness, second moment and down, which sees the mobile, they are all direct but subsequent cognizer, right? They are all direct at the same time subsequent cognizer. Is it clear? That the same I consciousness which keeps looking at this mobile, so in the second moment and down, they are all direct consciousness, but at the same time, they are subsequent cognizers, right? Okay, so this is about the direct can be prime cognizer as well as can be subsequent cognizer. Done. Now the inferential cognizer, can it have both prime and subsequent? So this we have to check, right? Let me give you an example. Okay. For example, while you are inside your house, inside your room, you can, hear the sound of the traffic, right? You can hear the sound of the traffic, right? I'm not sure how many of you are hearing it, but let's say while you're inside your room, you can hear the sound of the traffic. And from the sound of the traffic, you can infer the presence of the traffic outside. How many of you agree with me? Although you have not seen the traffic yourself, but just from the sound of the traffic, you can infer, oh, there is a lot of traffic outside, right? So this is, okay, anybody who can just volunteer to tell me this mind which knows the presence of the traffic outside through the sound of the traffic, is it a direct perceiver or inferential cognizer? What do you think? Anybody just unmute?
The inferential cognizer.
So it's an inferential cognizer. Why? Because what it sees is the traffic, right? What it knows is the traffic, but it doesn't know the traffic because it sees it directly, but through the inference, by depending on the sound of the traffic, right? By depending on the sound of the traffic, you infer the presence of the traffic outside. So this mind, which knows its object, which is presence of the traffic outside, by depending on the sound of the traffic, this is not a direct perceiver, but an inferential cognizer. Okay, how many of you agree with this? That this is an inferential cognizer. Clear? If you're clear, now tell me. So
Isn't it a sense consciousness of hearing?
Which one, Sureshji? If you can be a little more precise, which one is sense
The
consciousness?
sound of the traffic, which I'm hearing sitting in my room.
Yes.
It's a sense consciousness of hearing.
Right. That's
So
very
all
true.
the sense consciousnesses are valid.
All the sense consciousnesses are direct perceivers. That's what
Direct perceiver.
Right. Okay. So this is a very good question. So, okay, let me just clarify it here. Otherwise, if you have these kind of questions coming to your mind, please note them down. Please note them down and please ask me at the end of it. Okay. So what he's saying, okay, the sound is known through your ear consciousness, right? Which is a sensory consciousness. And we just learned that all sense consciousness should be direct in nature, right? And then you know the sound directly. You are not relying on anything else. So therefore, it should be a direct perceiver and not the inferential. Okay, so there are two things. You're right. With respect to sound, it's a direct perceiver. With respect to sound is coming directly to your ear consciousness. Your ear consciousness knows the sound directly. But on the basis of this sound, you infer the presence of traffic. That mind, the mind which knows the presence of traffic outside on the basis of the sound of the traffic, this mind is not direct perceiver. It's an inferential cognizer. So with respect to the sound, it's a direct perceiver, but with respect to the presence of the traffic outside your house, which you are not seeing, but you are very sure that okay, there must be traffic outside. How? Because you are hearing the sound of the traffic. So that mind which is very sure about the presence of the traffic outside, by dependence on what? By dependence on a sign of sound of the traffic. So that mind is inferential cognizer. Sureshji, is that clear now? So this we have to tease apart. Okay, with respect to the sound of the traffic, it's a direct perceiver, as Sureshji said, because it's a sensory consciousness. Very easy. Now, but with respect to the presence of the traffic, which you are not seeing, but you are very sure of that there is traffic. How? By depending on the sound that is coming to your ears, sound that you are hearing. So that is inferential cognizer. That's a mind which infers the presence of the traffic. Okay, if that is clear, now let's say this sound that is coming, let's say, can you hear that sound for 5 seconds, right? And then on that basis, you can infer the presence of the traffic for 5 seconds, right? You can infer the presence of the traffic for 5 seconds. So the first moment of mind, which infers the presence of the traffic, and then the second moment of mind, which infers the presence of the traffic, and the third moment of mind, which infers the presence of the traffic. So there are 5 moments. Only the first one is known as prime cognizer. Only the first one is given the label prime or valid cognizer. Whereas the second moment and down, they are all subsequent cognizer. Clear? Whereas second moment and down, they are all subsequent cognizer. So this we have to know that within inferential, there can be prime as well as subsequent. Okay, within inference, there can be prime and there can be subsequent. Likewise, within direct, there can be prime and there can be subsequent cognizer. Clear? Okay, good. If this is clear, let's move on to the next one. The correctly assuming consciousness. Okay, correctly assuming consciousness. So as the label itself says, there are 2 things, right? It's a assuming consciousness. It's a mind which assumes, right? It's a mind which assumes. But while it assumes, can we have the wrong assumptions or not? How many of you say that there can be wrong assumptions? There can be mind which assume its object incorrectly. Right, okay. But there can be mind which assume, which are assumptions, which make assumptions, but at the same time correct assumptions, right? So this one is the correct assumption. So while it is an assuming consciousness, but it's a correctly assuming consciousness. Means what it is assuming actually exists. This is the meaning. So whatever this mind is assuming actually exists. Okay. So for example, as I said that some people, when they attend few classes and then they, go to some teachings and then they study few texts on what Buddha taught and what Buddha discovered. So then they become very assertive, right? Not only assertive in the sense of that, okay, that it is that I know it, but they okay. For example, what is the panacea? What is the final panacea for all our problems? Wisdom of emptiness. Okay, so they know that okay, wisdom of emptiness is the final panacea for all our problem, because all our problems are rooted to something known as ignorance, self-grasping ignorance, and self-grasping ignorance can be counteracted by the wisdom and very precise wisdom of emptiness. So therefore, wisdom of emptiness is the one which is the final panacea, which is the real antidote for all my problems. Okay, so now, but then you ask deeper questions. How do you know that? So then they said, oh, I don't know, but Buddha taught it, right? Buddha taught it. So I'm very sure that this is the final panacea. So although you're very sure about it, and what is your assumption or what you are sure about is also true, right? It's also true, but you don't have known it yourself, right? You have not known it yourself. So this is on the level of correct assumption. So what you're assuming is correct. Okay, so what you're assuming, so this mind that you have is a assuming mind. At the same time, what you are assuming is validly existent. It exists validly. It is not wrong. Whereas some people can assume that, okay, I'm the Prime Minister of India, right? Anybody can do the daydreaming. I'm the Prime Minister of India. So person assumes oneself to be the Prime Minister of India. But that person, is he or she Prime Minister? No. So what the person is assuming is incorrect, right? So that is incorrect assumption. So whereas here, the fourth one is correctly assuming consciousnesses. So your mind is in the form of assumption. It assumes, but what it assumes, it exists. It exists there. Okay, it is existent. So that is known as correctly assuming consciousness. For example, let me give you another example. How many of us know that this mobile is made up of millions of atoms? How many of us know that this mobile is made up of millions of atoms? Just raise your hand, those who know this, right? And how many of us have actually seen atoms? At least I have not seen, but I am also very sure if somebody asks me that, okay, do you know that this mobile is made up of millions of atoms? Right? Yes. Okay, so this knowledge that I have, that this is made up of millions of atoms, it is on the level of the correctly assuming consciousness. I have believed in what scientists have told me, right? They must have done the experiments. They have done this. They have studied it properly. They have known this, but I have believed in what they have said. So my knowledge that this mobile is made up of millions of atoms is purely on the level of assumption. But this assumption is correct or incorrect? This is correct. If you put effort, you go to the, you do the way, you try to understand the way scientists have understood, you can also know that, okay, this mobile is made up of millions of atoms. But till now, I have always believed in what they have given to us. So this knowledge that I have is on the level of correct assumption. Clear? So this is also one kind of mind that we experience in our mental continuum. That the mind that we have could be correct, but they are purely assuming in nature. Why? Because if you ask deeper questions, how can you say that? How do you know that? Then you do not have convincing answers. It just, you point to an authority that, okay, so and so person said it. Okay, so and so book says this. So this is all on the level of correct assumption. Clear? So this is the fourth one, known as correctly assuming consciousness. And then the fifth one. What is the fifth one? Non-discerning direct perception. So this is something very interesting. Non-discerning direct perception. And I always say to my students in class whenever I get the chance to share this, sevenfold division of mind, that if you don't pay attention to what I'm saying to you right now, you can experience this right away. This category, non-discerning direct perception, can be experienced right away if you don't pay attention to what I'm saying right now. Okay, so how? What do you mean by non-discerning direct perception? So non-discerning direct perception, it has two elements. If you see, it's direct perception, it's a direct consciousness. It's not the inferential, it's not the conceptual, it's a direct consciousness, number one. Number two, it's non-discerning in nature. It doesn't discern its objects. Okay, non-discerning direct perception. So while it's a perception, it's a perceiver, it perceives object, but it doesn't discern its object. Okay, so let me give you one example and then you can understand it. Okay, for example, how many of you have this experience that, okay, when you have something very important to do, right? And then you have to attend something else. You have something very important to do, but at the same time, you have to attend something else, like a talk, like a seminar or something, but you have to do something very, very important, right? So while you're attending the seminar, and many of you must be experiencing this same thing right now, right? You're attending this class, but you might be having something very important to complete. And then your mind is always thinking about the same thing that you have to complete, right? Or have this project to finish tonight. I have to send this report tonight, or I have to do this work at my place tonight. Okay, so you have something very important. So your thoughts are always chasing after that work, right? Your mind is totally engrossed in what you have to do. Okay, so while you are in the class and gazing at the screen, right? And I think that, okay, the audience here is so attentive, right? They are listening to me with full attention. While I think so, but actually your mind is thinking about something else, right? Your mind is thinking about something very different. And then how do you know that? Next time I ask you a question and then you don't have any clue what I was saying, right? Does it happen to you or not? How many of you have the experience of something like that? And in schools, right? In schools, most of the time we have this experience, right? Teacher is teaching, we are gazing at the teacher, and then, but the mind has already taken a flight, right? Has already gone to what I have to do after the class, right? So where your mind is, your eyes are wide open, gazing at the object, gazing at the teacher, but your mind is pulled, is driven by something very important that you have to do. So there, although there is a perception happening, but your mind doesn't discern it. It doesn't register what you have heard or what you have seen. Okay, so this is known as non-discerning direct perception. It is known as non-discerning direct perception. Let me give you another example. For example, sometimes people, they are so much into music, right? They listen to the music, and while listening to the music, they are doing something else. And then while they are listening to the music is on, and a friend passes by, and then you don't realize although your eyes were wide open, and then the person was also there, and then both your eyes and the person came in contact, but still your mind did not register the presence of your friend, right? So when your mind is fully engrossed in something else, like music, listening to music, so this mind is known as non-discerning direct perception. And how can I know that it is non-discerning? Next moment the friend comes to you, oh, do you remember what I told you? So he said, what? I don't have any clue. So although the person came, said something, and also your eyes were wide open, your ears were open, listening to it, but your mind could not register it. Why? Because your mental consciousness were totally engrossed in something else, like music. So this mind is known as non-discerning direct perception. Non-discerning direct perception. Okay, good. Now the next one. Next one is doubting consciousness. Next one is doubting consciousness. Let me see the doubting consciousness. Okay, so doubting consciousness. What do you mean by doubting consciousness? It's a mind which doubts. Okay, so this is also one kind of mind that we experience. For example, let's say, and then this doubt can be of three kinds. Let me tell you this also. The mind that doubts can be of three kinds. Number one, a doubting mind which is tilted towards the reality. Okay, number one is the doubting mind, which is tilted toward the reality. Tilted towards the reality. Number two, the doubting minds, which are tilted towards the deceptivity, or not reality, no real, in other words, deceptivity, which is tilted towards the deceptivity or incorrect information. And the third one is the doubting consciousness, which is tilted towards both. Means tilted towards both, meaning correct and incorrect, reality and non-reality, tilted towards both equally. Okay, so the doubting mind that we have, any mind that doubts about anything, that can be of three kinds. For example, the doubt which is tilted towards the reality, then the doubt which is tilted towards the deceptivity or wrong information, and then the doubt which is tilted towards both equally. Okay, so now let me give you an example. For example, we learned from previous classes and also now that, okay, and that we have to learn. If we really want to know the essence of Buddha's teaching, we have to study what is known as wisdom of emptiness. Okay, wisdom of emptiness, because this is the only panacea to uproot our ignorance or uproot our afflictions. In other words, to eliminate all our suffering. And then if we want to expand our happiness, in terms to have lasting happiness, we have to also meditate on something known as Bodhichitta. Okay, Bodhichitta, or let's say great compassion. So all this we have learned, right? All this we have learned. And then somebody comes and say, oh, is it true that the wisdom of emptiness is, so doubts, the person doubts, is it true that the wisdom of emptiness is the final panacea or the final solution to all my problems? So this consciousness, the person is doubtful about it. Okay, the person is not saying that, okay, yes, it is, but saying, oh, is it true? Are you sure that the wisdom of emptiness is what Buddha discovered is the final panacea or is the final solution to all my problems? Sorry, give me a second. There is a power cut.
You can go on. It seems to work.
Okay, just give me a second. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, and I hope you can see me also now.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so doubt, right? Okay, so doubting consciousness. So as I said, let's say now we have listened, we have heard so many times that, okay, finally the panacea for all our problem is the wisdom of emptiness. It is the final solution. Okay, if we really want to get rid of all our suffering, the wisdom of emptiness is to be cultivated. So now then somebody comes, okay, are you sure? Are you sure that wisdom of emptiness is the solution to all my problem? Then there could be three responses to it. There are three ways of doubting at it. Okay, just see if you agree with me. One person saying, yeah, I'm not sure, but most likely it is the solution to all the problems. Okay, most likely it is the solution, right? So this is the doubting consciousness. The person is not sure, right? The person is not sure that this is the solution, but at the same time, the person's doubt is tilted toward the reality, is tilted towards the correct information that this is most likely, yes, it is. Yes, most likely, yes, it is. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure, but most likely wisdom of emptiness is the solution to all our problems. Okay, so this is the doubt. This is the first category, the doubting consciousness, which is tilted towards the facts. In other words, okay, now you can write the proper word. The doubting consciousness, which is tilted towards the fact. Okay, fact. Number two, the person comes and says, are you sure that the wisdom of emptiness is the final panacea, or is the solution to all our problems? Most likely not. Most likely not. It is not the solution. I'm very, very doubtful, but most likely it is not the solution to all our problems. So this is a doubting consciousness, at the same time tilted towards the non-fact. Tilted towards the non-fact. And don't worry that, okay, I don't know, even I don't know wisdom of emptiness is a true solution or not. Don't worry about that. Okay, so the point is we have to be very open. Be open. If it is a solution, of course I'll use it. If it is not a solution, of course I'll not use it. Okay, so remaining open. So that's a very healthy doubt. That's a very healthy doubt. Okay, healthy way of doubting it. Okay, so now the doubting consciousness, as I said, first is where the doubting mind is tilted towards the fact. Whereas the other one is most likely it is not the solution. You know, it's just the fabrication. It's just the fabrication, but I'm not sure. So this is a doubting consciousness which is tilted towards the non-fact or incorrect information. Incorrect information. And then the third person comes and says, I have no clue. I'm very doubtful. It could be and it may not be. Okay, it could be the final solution and it may not be the final solution. So this person's doubting consciousness or doubting mind is tilted towards both equally, right? Tilted towards both equally, towards the fact also equally, towards the non-fact also equally. So this is the third category, doubting consciousness tilted towards both. Tilted towards both fact and non-fact. Clear? The three kinds of doubting consciousnesses. Anybody who can just confirm it? That okay, yes. At least I understood what is being said here. Okay, if no question, then I go to the next one. What is that? Deceptive consciousness, the last one. Okay, the last one. So the deceptive consciousness, as the word says, deceptive or wrong consciousness. So, okay, let me give you, it's a technical way of putting it, but it's a very clear presentation of this mind. Deceptive mind or wrong mind. Deceptive consciousness or wrong consciousness. And you know, you must be noticing that, okay, I'm using the consciousness and mind interchangeably. Okay, interchangeably. But it is not the case that, okay, whoever uses consciousness, you should think about the mind that we have studied. And whoever uses the word mind, that's fine. Okay, so consciousness can be used in different contexts. This we have to know. The consciousness word can be used in different contexts and different traditions. Different traditions, they borrow this English word consciousness to mean something different also. Something different. For example, in some tradition, to convey this concept of soul. This concept of soul, in Hindi we call it Atma. They borrow the same English term, consciousness. So just don't, you know, just don't easily equate it with anything. Anytime you hear consciousness, don't think that, okay, it is talking about the clear and knowing agent, right? So this we have to listen to the person very carefully, whether the person is talking about a mind which is clear and knowing nature, or it is talking about something known as soul. Okay, so this word consciousness is used in different contexts. Okay, keeping that aside, now here in this, you know, what we are studying here, psychology, in the mainstream Nalanda tradition. In the mainstream Nalanda tradition, we are using these words, vocabularies interchangeably. Mind means consciousness, consciousness means mind. Okay, so here they are synonymous. They are used as synonymous. Okay, so deceptive mind or deceptive consciousness, both are fine. Okay, so now deceptive or wrong consciousness. What do you mean by that? It simply means this mind, the object that this mind is seeing is non-existent. In a very technical and simple form also. The object that this mind is seeing is it doesn't exist. And therefore, they are deceptive in nature. They are wrong minds. For example, let me give you an example. The example I gave in the beginning of the class. For example, is it possible or not that, okay, from the distance, when the light is so dim, you see this chocolate, right? You see this mobile as chocolate. So it's a correct mind or deceptive mind? This is a deceptive mind. Why? Because what it sees does not exist, right? How many of you agree with me that this mind which sees this mobile as chocolate, what it sees does not exist. There is no chocolate there, right? There is no chocolate there, but this mind is seeing this mobile as a chocolate. So this is known as deceptive or wrong consciousness. Deceptive or wrong consciousness. Deceptive mind. In other words, a mind which sees an object and the object that it is seeing does not exist. In technical form, the object of apprehension of this mind is non-existent. What is apprehended by this mind is non-existent. Okay? What this mind perceives, what this mind apprehends is non-existent, doesn't exist. For example, another example that I gave is when when there is no clear light in the room and there is a coil of rope on the floor, and then from the distance, if the vision is not very clear, then you can mistake it for snake, right? So this eye consciousness, this eye which sees the rope as snake, this is a mistake. This is a deceptive consciousness, right? Why deceptive? Because what it sees does not exist. What it sees is the rope as snake, and rope is not snake, right? It's a rope. So therefore, this is a deceptive mind. This is an erroneous mind. This is a wrong consciousness. Okay, so these are the different way, or some people translate it as distorted minds. Okay, distorted minds. In other words, you have to know what this mind sees or apprehend is non-existent. Then it is known as deceptive or wrong consciousness. So now within deceptive or wrong, there can be both inferences, the minds which infer, they can also be there, and the mind which directly see their object, they can also be there. Means, in other words, there could be direct deceptive consciousness and there can be conceptual deceptive consciousness. Do you remember from the last class, we learned something known as non-conceptual and conceptual. How many of you remember that? Something known as conceptual and non-conceptual. Anybody who can help me with the distinction? How to understand the distinction between these two, conceptual and non-conceptual consciousness? Anybody?
Non-conceptual consciousness perceives the object directly, but conceptual consciousness needs meaning generality, a generic image.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, David. Okay, so what we learned is, as David said, that direct consciousnesses are the minds which know or perceive their object directly, right? Directly, without having to rely on the generic image, without having to rely on the image of the object. Whereas conceptual consciousnesses are the minds that know their object via generic image or by depending on the generic image. And then, as David said, another term used, translation is meaning generality or generic image. So for example, the example I gave, all the thinking mind that we have, all the thinking mind, the mind that think, they are always conceptual in nature. All the mind that think, they have to get to their objects through generic image of the object. For example, right now, when you're attending the class, you can think about your mother, right? You can think about your mother. So this mind, which knows the mother, only knows it through the generic image of the mother. What actually comes to your mind is the image of the mother comes. And through that, you know the mother. You don't see the mother directly, right? So all the thinking mind that we have, they are always conceptual in nature. So likewise, this category, deceptive consciousnesses, can be of two kinds: non-conceptual deceptive consciousnesses and the conceptual deceptive consciousnesses. Okay, so non-conceptual, for example, as I told you, that let's say your eye consciousness perceives this mobile as chocolate, apprehends this mobile to be the chocolate. So this is a wrong consciousness. At the same time, this is a direct consciousness. This is a sensory consciousness, right? Whereas, let's say, you can think that, okay, this mobile is a chocolate, right? You can think that. So that also is a wrong consciousness, but this is a conceptual wrong consciousness. conceptual wrong consciousness. Clear? So within wrong or within deceptive, there can be two kinds, conceptual and non-conceptual. Both can be there. Okay, good. I think, Tenzila, how much time?
We still have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, and you might be having questions also. So just let me just share this with you so that later on, if you get the chance, you should, study. Okay, so the next slide, as I told you that, okay, this direct perceivers, right? The first category known as direct valid perceiver. If you divide it further, there are four divisions. It doesn't mean that, okay, direct perceivers are only four. No, there can be millions and trillions kinds of direct perceptions, but a very beautiful way of dividing them or classifying them is under the four. In other words, all these million trillions types of direct perceptions direct perceivers should fall under any of these four categories, right? What are they? Sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceivers, self-cognizant direct perceivers, and yogic direct perceivers. So they are again very interesting and very, very important and empirical realities. Okay, so sense direct perceiver, mental direct perceiver, self-cognizant direct perceiver, and the yogic direct perceiver. And in the courses that are offered by Tibet House, like the Nalanda diploma course, and I think nowadays there is advertisement for the Nalanda certificate course. So there, as a part of these courses, Nalanda certificate course, diploma course, and then later on master's course, we study all these divisions in detail. Their definitions are being studied, their examples are being studied, and also their further divisions are being studied. Okay. So this, if you get the chance, it'll be very, very helpful to study this. Okay. So now, now I think I open it for questions and clarifications. Anybody?
Ujala, could I ask?
Yes, please. If
Yeah.
you can tell me your name.
Yeah, I'm Neeraj.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes,
Ujala, actually, I just wanted to request you to, the clarification you gave to Suresh ji. I just wanted that clarified for sound objects and objects of smell. How do we distinguish between direct valid perception and inferential cognition? Like, actually, we had three examples. One was fire and smoke, where first we were seeing with the eye consciousness, and then the food, cooking, and smell, where you first smelt it with the nose. I mean, I perceived it with the nose consciousness, and then the sound and traffic. So, if you could also then say in which case is a direct valid perception for smell and sound, where visual consciousness is not involved. Suppose visual consciousness was not to be involved at all. Then for sound and smell, just to clarify, get that clarity for myself.
Thank you, Neeraj. Thank you. This is very important question. In fact, this tells me that we have to study psychology in more detail, right? And as I mentioned, what now Neeraj is asking for more examples where, okay, for example, your eye sees something. For example, your eye sees the smoke, right? So this is a direct perception. And what kind of direct perception? So this, can you see that sense direct perceiver on the screen? So we didn't get the chance to go into the detail of the direct valid perceiver. So as I told you, direct valid perceiver, there are four kinds. Overall speaking, four kinds: sense direct perceivers, mental direct perceiver, self-cognizant direct perceiver, and yogic direct perceiver. Then within sense direct perceiver, the first category, there are five. Again, five. Visual sensed consciousness, auditory sensed consciousness, olfactory sensed consciousness, gustatory sensed consciousness, and tactile sensed consciousness. To put it simply, eye consciousness, then ear consciousness, then taste consciousness, smell consciousness, and the body consciousness. Okay, so these are the five. Now Neeraj is asking me that, okay, so the way we learned, okay, when you see the smoke, through seeing the smoke, you infer the presence of the fire, right? So with respect to smoke is seen through your eye consciousness, right? So when your eye consciousness see the smoke, so with respect to smoke, seeing the smoke, it's a direct perceiver, right? It's a direct perceiver. You don't have to rely on any reason to say, oh, there is smoke. You are seeing it directly. And within direct perceiver, what kind of direct perceiver? If you can see on the screen, there are 5 types of direct perceptions. So within that, it is the first one, visual sense consciousness or eye consciousness in simple terms. Okay, visual consciousness. Now, can I give other examples where it's not the eyes, but other, right? For example, Neeraj brought up the example of, let's say, through the smell, you are getting the smell of the food and you are sure that, okay, I have not cooked any food in my house. So for sure, this smell is not coming from my house. It is coming from the neighborhood. And then in the neighborhood, from this smell. So this smell is perceived by what? If you see on the screen, this smell is perceived by olfactory sense consciousness or your nose consciousness. So with respect to this smell, this is a direct perception. Direct, right? Your nose consciousness is engaging with the smell directly, perceives the smell directly. But on the basis of that perception, you infer something else also. What is that inference? Oh, there must be food in my neighborhood. There is somebody cooking food in my neighborhood. So that is inference. So inference on the basis of what your nose has perceived. Inference on the basis of what your nose has perceived as the smell, right? So this is another example of inference on the basis of what your nose consciousness perceives. And likewise, sound. For example, the example I gave, while you are sitting in your room, you hear the sound of the traffic, right? Sound of the traffic. So with respect to the sound, what hears your sound is your ear consciousness. In this list, the second one, auditory sense consciousness. Auditory sense consciousness or the ear consciousness. So with respect to that sound, which is perceived by your ear consciousness, it's a direct perception. Direct perception. Whereas on the basis of this sound, you infer something else. What is that? Oh, there must be traffic outside. There must be heavy traffic outside. So that is so this mind which knows the presence of the heavy traffic outside on the basis of what your ear consciousness hears, that is the inferential cognizer. Clear? So this we have to tease apart within the same. Oh, this all happens so fast, right? We never think, okay, this is now the mind that I have is actually with respect to sound, it's ear consciousness. But with respect to my mind, which infers the presence of the traffic, it's inferential cognition. We never think. It happens so fast. But now, having studied this, and if you get the chance to study in detail, we can do this exercise. We can do this exercise to identify these different kinds of mind within our mental stream. And then once you have identified, you manipulate them to have the most refined form of them. How? Through studying what is wisdom, through studying how to cultivate the bodhicitta. Okay, so this will come in the later session. Neeraj, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else has any question? Or any clarification to us? Yes.
I actually wanted to just clarify the same question, Neeraj's question.
Okay.
So I understand from what you're saying, say in case of garlic, if we have a choice of being able to see the garlic pod and smell it and touch it. We can do all three. Then only when my eye consciousness engages with it, it is direct perception. But if I smell it, it will not be called, even if I'm very sure it will not be called a direct perception. And if I feel it, it will not be called a direct perception. So in some ways, even though we have 5 sense consciousnesses, it's only the eye, which then is a direct perception, and everything else is a valid inference. Is that how? Have I understood it correct?
Thank you, Nimaji. It will help me. So thank you for this question. It will help us to clarify the 5 kinds of direct perceptions, which I could not cover, but thank you for these questions. So now let's say the example Nimaji brought up is, let's say, the garlic. So one is you see the garlic, right? Your eyes see the garlic, number 1. Number 2, your nose consciousness smells the garlic. Smells the garlic, and the garlic is there, right there. Okay, and you can smell the garlic. Okay, smell. And then the third one is you touch it and you can feel that this is garlic, right? Feel this is garlic. So now the first one is eye consciousness, which directly perceives the garlic. Okay, directly perceives the garlic, which is a visual form of the garlic. Then the second one is also a direct perception. What is that? Your nose consciousness is directly perceiving the smell of the garlic. If you say that there is no garlic, but you are smelling it, but you cannot see it. So although you don't see it, but you can say, oh, there must be garlic somewhere, you know, there must be garlic in this room. I am not able to see it, but there is garlic. Why? Because the smell is coming. Then it's inference. Whereas if the garlic is like there and the smell is coming, and the smell, with respect to the smell, your nose consciousness perceives, this is a direct perception. With respect to the smell, with respect to the smell, nose consciousness perceives this directly. You don't need any other thing to smell this, right? Smell is perceived directly by your nose consciousness. Okay, so this is also direct perception. Which one out of this 5? The third one, olfactory sense consciousness. Olfactory, or let's say nose sense consciousness. Nose sense consciousness. So the object of nose sense consciousness are the smells. Always the smell, gandh. Okay, and then third one is body sense consciousness. You touch the garlic. You touch the garlic, and then you can feel the tactility of the garlic, right? You can feel, oh, this is very smooth. This is not hard. This is, you know, so this tactility that you perceive, that is done through your body consciousness, through your body consciousness. And that is a direct perception. Out of the 5 given on the screen, it is the 5th one, tactile sense consciousness. We also call it body sense consciousness. Another way of putting it, body sense consciousness or tactile sense consciousness. So when you hold the garlic in your hand and then you feel, oh, this garlic is very soft, it's not hard. So that is where you perceive the tactility of the garlic. So that tactility is perceived directly by your body sense consciousness. What is the 5th one? Okay. And then the sound is not there with the garlic, right? Sound is not there. So therefore, visual is there, smell is there, tactile is there, and if you taste, you know, if you taste the garlic, then the gustatory, 4th one is also there. So you can, with respect to the taste of the garlic, then you have the tongue sense consciousness or gustatory sense consciousness. So 4 are there and the 5th one is not there with the garlic. It can be, okay? Imaji, does that clarify a little bit?
Pujala, sorry, I'll just add. So linked to what I and Nima and I asked, but then suppose I'm not seeing it, I taste it, and then the next moment I say, this is garlic, the thought comes. That's inferential or is it direct based on after the taste?
Okay, the thought comes. That's interesting. Right. Okay.
So why, you know, in a sense, what Nima and I were asking is, in a sense, are we privileging the visual sense consciousness in some way compared to the others vis-a-vis this? There's some confusion between that direct and inferential. Like,
okay.
like the example of, you know, the food. Okay, if you say food cooking in the neighborhood, then that's inferential. But when you smell it and with that smell, the thought comes, this is the smell of food. That itself is inferential or is it direct?
Okay. So now I have to be clear with respect to smell, it is direct, right? Because smell, your nose consciousness directly perceiving the smell, right?
Yes.
You don't have to rely on any reason, right?
Yes.
Now this smell is of the smell of the food, or it is not of the food, or the food is in the neighborhood. So of course you are relying on your direct perception to infer something else. Okay, so and then of course there are many other things like the concepts involved. That okay, you have to have the concept of, okay, this smell is related to the smell of the food, you know, beforehand. If you don't have the idea of the that okay, this smell is of the smell of the food, then also you cannot think of the food, right? So now we have to be clear with respect to smell is direct. You know what you are smelling, right? Directly. Okay, you don't have to rely on any reason. Oh, are you smelling something? Oh, I have to look for a reason. No, you are smelling it directly. Okay, so that is a direct nose consciousness. Okay, now on that basis you infer many other facts. Okay, this might be a stale food, this might be a delicious food. Oh, it might be my mother cooking this because it's a very nice smell. So all these are inferences on the basis of what you perceive directly. Okay, okay, thank you. Anybody else has any question?
So, Pooja ji, yeah, I just have one question. Self-grasping ignorance, does it come with the direct perceivers also, or is it just a deceptive mind, conceptual deceptive mind?
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Shantiji. Thank you for this question. Okay. Shantiji, I think Shantiji knows this answer, right? Okay, so yes, the answer is okay. How, that we have to work on it. That's a very important question. In fact, the more we know about it, the more conviction we get it, then the more conviction we'll get, oh, we can get rid of it, Okay, so the self-grasping ignorance, of course, it's a distorted mind. It's a deceptive seventh out of the, let me show it to you. Out of the seven fold division of mind, this is the seventh one, deceptive mind. Why? Because what we learned is what it apprehends is non-existent. Okay, so those who are new to it, don't worry. Self-grasping ignorance is an ignorance which views phenomena as truly existent. Okay, so while things are not objectively real, while things are merely dependently originated, the self-grasping ignorance job is to see everything as independently real, right? As truly real. So it is a deceptive mind. Why deceptive? Because what it apprehends does not exist, right? Things never existed in an independent manner. They always exist by dependence, by dependent origination. So therefore, it is a deceptive consciousness. Now, within deceptive, we learned there are two, right? Within deceptive, there can be conceptual one and there can be direct one. Or in other words, there can be conceptual and there can be non-conceptual one. So the self-grasping ignorance is a conceptual one. Conceptual one. It is always a mental consciousness. Self-grasping ignorance is always a mental consciousness. And within mental consciousness, always conceptual mental consciousness. And how? That's a big question that we have to explore. Shantiji, does that answer? Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you, Pujala.
Okay. Okay. If anybody, no question? Okay, good. So Tenzin Lengmula, what should we do now?
Okay, so with this, we have come to the end of today's program.
Davidla, you have a question or you want to comment?
I just want to
Sorry,
reflect.
your
Want to
voice
continue
broke
on.
for me. If you can repeat it.
No, I just came with a reflection to continue Niraj's question. He asked whether we are giving preference to the visual sense in this, and I think that we do, because the visual sense is the most important sense for us humans. That's our best sense. Contrary to dogs, they have smelling and hearing. So suppose, Niraji, that you are sitting in your house and you are feeling a smell that you don't recognize. It is not food, and it's not flowers. It's some chemical something. You have never felt it before. You don't know what it is. You can't make any inference. You can't say that this is some gas leak or whatever. Then you don't get any further. There is no inference to make, isn't it? And same if you hear a sound that you never heard before, you don't know what it is. So you can't, it's a direct perception, but then it's stop, because you can't make any inference. Pudyaji, is it correct or not?
Okay, thank you, Davidla, for clarifying. Yes, what David said is the most prevalent one for us is the sensory. Within sensory is the eye consciousness, right? The visual consciousness, which attracts, which pulls our attention most of the time. So, but of course, the other senses are there, they are working. And then the examples that we worked on, right? For example, through the smell, you infer something, through the taste, you infer something, and then through you touch something and you're not able to see it, but through the smoothness and roughness of the object, you can infer a lot about the object, right? Although you're not able to see it, but you can infer a lot about the object. Just something slithering comes in your hand, and then you can be, oh, there could be, some reptile. Okay, so you can infer many things. It may not be correct, it may be correct, but this is possible. So other senses, they are all working, but for us, what really pulls our attention is the visual objects, but others are working. Others are also working there. Okay, thank you. Thank you, David Love, for your comment. And okay, if no more question, and if somebody has more questions, then my email ID, you can always write to me. Thank you. So Tenzin Lemula, over to you.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. So we have come to the end of today's program. And on behalf of Tibet House, I would like to thank our speaker, Dr. Pujala, for a very insightful presentation and sharing your valuable knowledge. And we are very grateful for the time and effort you took to share your thoughts and experience with us. So thank you once again. And I also want to thank all the participants for joining today's program. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tenzin Lemula, and thank you, Tibet House, for this opportunity again, and also for all the participants here, especially my classmates from NMC and NDC, who, despite they know all this, they have come to, just have the discussion and, more clarification. Thank you for your presence. Thank you.
So much, Dr. Pujala. Thank you, Queen Jedla.
Thank you, Pujala.
Thank you,
Thank
Pujala.
you.